Jake immediately didn't trust him. "Who are you?" he demanded, pointing his crowbar at Marcus. Marcus raised his hands. "Easy. I'm not infected. Name's Marcus. I'm a microbiologist, or at least I was before all this." "What are you doing here?" Ellie asked. "Looking for supplies, same as you," Marcus replied. His eyes flicked to Mila, then back to Jake and Ellie. "I know what caused this." Jake narrowed his eyes. "What do you mean?" Marcus hesitated. "It's not a virus. It's a prion, a kind of protein that infects the brain. It was designed in a lab, probably for military use. But something went wrong. Either it escaped, or someone let it loose." Ellie's stomach dropped. She thought of Dr. Collins and his cryptic warnings. "You're saying this was man-made?" she asked. Marcus nodded grimly. Jake scoffed. "Great. Another scientist with answers but no solutions." "Actually," Marcus said, "I might have a solution. But I need to get to a proper lab to test it." The journey to the base was grueling. The group faced swarms of infected, forcing them to take longer, more dangerous routes. Supplies ran low, and tension between Jake and Marcus escalated. One night, as they camped in an abandoned gas station, Mila asked, "Do you think the safe zone will really be safe?" Ellie didn't know how to answer. She glanced at Jake, who was sharpening his knife by the fire. "We'll find out soon enough," he said gruffly. When they finally reached the base, it was a nightmare. The gates were wide open, bodies strewn across the ground. The roar of gunfire echoed from inside as soldiers and civilians fought desperately against an overwhelming swarm of infected. "Stay back," Jake ordered, but it was too late. A soldier, his uniform torn and bloodied, staggered toward them. "Help us," he gasped before an infected tackled him from behind. Jake pulled Ellie and Mila behind a crashed Humvee as Marcus scanned the scene. "This isn't a safe zone," Ellie whispered, her voice trembling. "It was," Marcus said grimly. "Not anymore." The infected began to notice them, their heads snapping toward the group. "We need to move," Jake shouted. The group bolted toward the nearest building, dodging grasping hands and snapping jaws. They slammed the door shut behind them, barricading it with whatever they could find. From a broken window, Ellie saw the survivors making their last stand in the base's main courtyard. A small group of soldiers and civilians fired wildly into the horde, but it was clear they were losing. "What do we do now?" Mila asked, her voice shaking. Jake looked at Ellie, his expression grim. "We fight." This chapter ends with the group trapped inside the base, the promise of safety shattered, and the reality of the apocalypse sinking in. The base courtyard was a battlefield. Floodlights flickered, casting eerie shadows over the chaos. Infected swarmed the survivors, their guttural snarls drowning out the sporadic gunfire. Ellie crouched behind a stack of sandbags, clutching a rifle she barely knew how to use. Jake was beside her, firing methodically into the advancing horde. "Cover me," he barked, darting toward a soldier pinned beneath a fallen Humvee. Ellie raised her rifle, aiming shakily at the infected closing in on Jake. She pulled the trigger, the recoil nearly knocking her back. The bullet struck its target, a rotting corpse crumpled to the ground. "Nice shot," Jake shouted, dragging the injured soldier to safety. But the victory was short-lived. More infected poured in through the shattered gates, overwhelming the defenders. Ellie watched in horror as a young civilian, no older than Mila, was dragged screaming into the mass of bodies. "We're losing," someone yelled. Jake grabbed Ellie's arm. "Fall back. We can't hold this." The group retreated through the base, weaving through darkened hallways filled with the echoes of distant screams. "We need a way out," Ellie said, her voice shaking. Jake scanned the area, his eyes landing on a steel door marked restricted access. "There," he said. Marcus hesitated. "That's not an exit. That's—" Jake didn't wait for him to finish. He kicked the door open, revealing a set of stairs leading down into a dimly lit corridor. The air grew colder as they descended, the hum of fluorescent lights filling the silence. The corridor ended in a large laboratory, its walls lined with glass chambers containing grotesque, half-formed creatures. Ellie gagged at the sight. What is this place?" Marcus stepped forward, his face pale. "This is where it started." He pointed to a series of monitors displaying grainy footage. The videos showed scientists in hazmat suits injecting prisoners with a glowing green serum. The subjects convulsed, their bodies contorting into monstrous shapes. "They were experimenting," Marcus said, "trying to create a weaponized virus. But they couldn't control it." Jake slammed his fist on a nearby console. "And now we're paying the price." As the group searched for anything useful, Mila wandered into a sealed room at the back of the lab. Inside, she found a laptop and a series of locked cabinets. She opened one of the drawers and found a vial of blood labeled Project Lazarus. Her hand trembled as she pocketed it. The laptop buzzed to life as she opened it, revealing encrypted files with cryptic titles. Patient 0, Immunity Protocol, Lazarus Trials, Mila. Ellie's voice called from the hallway. Mila turned just as an infected soldier lunged at her from the shadows. She screamed, raising her arms to block the attack. The soldier's teeth sank into her forearm before Jake appeared, driving his knife into its skull. "Mila!" Ellie rushed to her, her eyes wide with panic. "You're bitten." Mila looked at the wound, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." The group didn't have time to process Mila's bite. The infected were breaking through the lab's main doors, their guttural snarls echoing down the hall. "Move," Jake shouted, leading them through a maintenance tunnel. Ellie helped Mila walk, her mind racing. Mila was pale and trembling, but something was different. She wasn't convulsing or turning violent like the others. They emerged outside, the cold night air hitting them like a slap. The base burned in the distance, the infected pouring out like ants from a disturbed nest. Jake set up a small camp a few miles away. Marcus tended to Mila's wound, his face a mask of concentration. "It's been hours," Ellie said, pacing. "Shouldn't she have turned by now?" Marcus didn't answer immediately. He pulled out the vial Mila had taken and examined it closely. "What is that?" Jake asked. "Project Lazarus," Marcus murmured. "It wasn't just about creating the virus. It was about creating immunity." Mila stirred, her eyes fluttering open. "What's happening to me?" she whispered. Marcus looked at her, his expression a mix of awe and fear. "You're not turning because you're immune. Somehow, your blood is fighting the infection." Ellie stared at him. "What does that mean?" "It means," Marcus said, holding up the vial, "Mila might be the key to stopping this." Mila looked at her bandaged arm, her eyes wide. "But what if I'm not? What if?" She trailed off as distant snarls echoed through the night. "The infected were coming. We don't have time for what ifs," Jake said, grabbing his weapon. "We need to move." Ellie glanced at Mila, then back at Marcus. "If she's immune, we can't leave her behind." "No," Marcus agreed, his voice grim. "But if the wrong people find out about her, she's as good as dead." The group packed up quickly, the weight of their discovery heavy on their shoulders. As they disappeared into the darkness, the camera lingered on the burning base, a stark reminder of what was at stake. This chapter ends with Mila's immunity reveal, raising new questions about her connection to Project Lazarus and setting the stage for the group's next move. The safe house was a dilapidated cabin hidden deep within the woods, its windows boarded and its walls covered with hastily scribbled notes and diagrams. "Doctor." Collins opened the door cautiously, his wild eyes scanning the group. "Ellie," he said, his voice both relieved and wary. "I didn't think I'd see you again." "Neither did I," Ellie replied. She gestured to Mila, pale but alert, standing between Jake and Marcus. "We need your help." Collins ushered them inside, locking the door behind them. "I've been monitoring the infection, trying to understand it. What makes you think I can help?" Marcus stepped forward. "Because this girl is immune." Collins froze, his gaze snapping to Mila. "Immune? That's impossible." "It's not," Marcus said. "She was bitten, and she hasn't turned. Her blood might hold the key to stopping this." Collins stared at Mila for a moment, then nodded. "Let's find out." The cabin's interior was a chaotic mix of scientific equipment, survival gear, and scattered notebooks. Collins and Marcus worked side by side, their movements tense and precise. Mila sat on a makeshift cot, her arm extended as Collins drew a vial of her blood. "This might sting a little," he said, his tone unusually gentle. "I'm used to it," Mila murmured. Ellie watched from the corner, her eyes flicking between the scientists. "What are you hoping to find?" Marcus didn't look up. If her blood neutralizes the prion, it could mean she has a genetic mutation that makes her immune. If we can isolate that mutation, we could synthesize a cure. Collins glanced at him. "That's a big if." Jake leaned against the wall, his arms crossed. "And what happens to Mila while you're doing all this? She's not some lab rat." "No one's suggesting that," Ellie said, shooting him a warning look. Hours passed as the scientists analyzed Mila's blood. Finally, Marcus held up a slide, his expression a mix of awe and disbelief. "It's there," he said. "Her blood contains antibodies that attack the prion and render it inert. This isn't just immunity, it's resistance." Collins nodded slowly. "She's a walking cure." Later that night, Jake pulled Ellie aside while Mila slept. "I don't trust him," he said, nodding toward Marcus. Ellie frowned. "Why? He's the one who figured out Mila's immunity." "That's the problem," Jake said. "He's too interested in her. He's not thinking about what's best for Mila. He's thinking about what she can do for him." Ellie hesitated. "You think he has ulterior motives?" "I know he does," Jake said. "I've seen guys like him before. They'll do whatever it takes to get what they want, no matter who they hurt." Ellie looked toward Marcus, who was jotting notes in a corner. She couldn't deny that there was something calculating about him.